Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2023 movie titled Escalation. Please be advised that there might be spoilers ahead. In the opening scene, an SUV pulls up to a gate, where armed guards look uneasily. Suddenly, the guard is shot dead. The others open fire on the car, causing it to crash. When someone starts shooting from the rear seat, the men rush to investigate. Chris, a former police officer, engages with the men until he sustains a gunshot wound. The scene shifts 3 days before, where Chris runs a dojo where people work out, spar, and demonstrate self-defense techniques. We then see him addressing a group of students, instructing them that the best approach to dealing with an assailant is to first defuse the situation, explaining that handing over their wallet is easier and safer than fighting. One man takes offense, stating that he will not hand over his stuff in this manner and that he did not come to learn Eastern philosophy. He demands his money back, and Chris promises to repay it after class. But the man violently approaches Chris, who calmly withdraws his wallet. The man wisely chooses to depart instead. Chris then continues to teach the lesson. After class, Chris is tidying up when Lieutenant Archer arrives. Chris already knows Archer would ask him to rejoin the police force, but this time she wants him to come back and train the officers, giving him the flexibility to create his own curriculum and standards. Chris first refuses, but Archer accepts, reminding him of his father's charitable deeds and informing him that the offer is still available. She leaves, and Chris examines the photograph of his brother, father, and himself. He returns to his flat shortly afterward and settles in. He recalls the battle he had with his brother after their father died, and he goes to collect a photo of them that he had stashed away. The next day, Chris arrives at the precinct and recalls the day he walked out, never expecting to return. He goes inside, where he gets officers' attention, and then to the gym, where he sees his brother Ken playing basketball. The two converse quietly about their unfinished basketball game, and Chris informs Ken about his new job, teaching defusing and disarming skills. At that point, Sergeant Hatton and another cop enter, and it is clear that he dislikes Chris from the start. He learns about Chris's impending presentations, mocks him, and then asks Chris to demonstrate a technique. Chris politely declines, but Archer, who is walking by, advises him to proceed. Chris opens his case, reveals a pretend gun, and passes it to Hatton before pulling out a marker and telling him that a mark indicates he is dead. Hatton believes he has this under control and gives the go-ahead, but Chris is quick to react and marks him in the face. Ken smirks at Chris, proud of his brother, and Archer instructs Hatton to go do some paperwork, but he is clearly uncomfortable. After that, Archer and Chris chat in her office, and Chris expresses concern about Hatton's attitude, but Archer points out that Hatton carries weight and that Chris must work with him. Chris leaves the office and runs into Detective Michelle, a former love interest. The two decide to catch up after work and go bowling. The two reminisce about the past, and she brings up his family, a topic Chris prefers to avoid. After the date, Chris takes Michelle home, where she encourages him to discuss matters with his brother and kisses him on the cheek goodnight. Next, we see some gangsters approach their hideout, unknowing that a group of officers, including Ken and Hatton, is closing in on them. The cops burst into the property, but a gangster notices them and raises the alarm. He flees, but Ken tracks him down and captures him before a shootout breaks out inside. He brings the handcuffed man back into the building as he passes two cops carrying bags. He runs into another cop, Perry, who informs him that Hatton is waiting for him out front and threatens Ken to hand over the criminal. Ken complies, but the mobster begs him not to leave him alone with Perry. As Ken comes around the bend, he hears a single gunshot, and a body hits the ground. Chris is at home that night when there is a loud banging on the front door. He goes to check on Ken and is surprised to find him collapsed to the ground, covered in blood. Chris anxiously tries to assist him, but Ken simply hands him a vigorous drive before passing out in his arms. A neighbor, who had seen Ken, called the cops, and two of Hatton's men, Spencer and Gale, arrived. Gale walks directly to the neighbor, eager to talk, while Spencer wonders if Ken said or provided anything to Chris. Chris instantly tries to conceal the drive, but Spencer notices this and points a gun at him. Gale returns, and he and Spencer compel Chris to return to his apartment and close the door. Spencer begins to demand that Chris tell him what he knows from Ken. Chris refuses to talk. Gale then positions a gun near Chris and yells gun, but Chris evades a shot and instantly knocks out the two cops. He swiftly exits the apartment without shoes, prompting Gale, who has just recuperated, to search for him, only to discover that Chris has vanished. Michelle is asleep when she receives a call about the attack at Chris's apartment and rushes over. She is shocked to find Ken's body at the door. She enters the apartment and meets with the lead forensics officer, who transports her to Ken's car out back. She discovers that Spencer and Gale were on the scene before anyone arrived. They reported hearing gunshots as they walked by, and a mysterious Asian man, who has since disappeared, assaulted them, leaving Michelle perplexed. We then witness Spencer and Kurt tend to their wounds. Hatton soon arrives at the scene, and the two cops become concerned. Hatton asks whether they located the device and becomes enraged when he hears they didn't. Gale tries to make excuses, but Hatton headbutts him and drops him. He draws a gun, ordering them both to find and kill Chris, or someone will pay. The cops agree. A cop in a patrol car notices Chris strolling barefoot through the city and makes a call. Michelle approaches Archer at the station, seeking an explanation for Ken's death, Chris's disappearance, and the suspicion of two off-duty police officers. Because she trusts Michelle, Archer has given her the case to investigate. Despite Archer's need for answers, she is unable to delegate the issue to anyone, as Chris's involvement and reputation are at risk. Michelle suddenly receives a text and hurries out of the office. The cop who saw Chris then meets with Gale and another killer, King, and informs them that Chris is inside the bowling alley. Meanwhile, Chris, sitting alone, discovers he faces an accusation of killing Ken. Outside, Gale and King are about to go inside when they notice Michelle pull up and run in. She notices Chris and approaches him, shocking him. She apologizes for Ken's situation, expresses her desire to help him, and is taken aback when she discovers that Chris is evading two police officers. He displays the disc to her, but she urges him to surrender and enter protective custody. However, Chris feels she can't shield him from the police. She needs to perform her job, so Chris tells her to forget it and departs. Michelle finds him in the bathroom, unsure how he wants her to assist him. Chris gives her the drive, which she accepts tentatively and leaves, vowing to speak with Archer. When Michelle drives away, Gale and King prepare to pursue Chris. The two rush in and take Chris off guard, holding him at gunpoint. Gale demands the drive, and Chris says he has it with him. King approaches to search him, but he gets too close, and Chris disarms him. He swiftly strikes the men, forcing them to retreat, and then launches a simultaneous attack on them. Chris fights them both as hard as he can, eventually knocking King back and using Gale's face to stop a bowling ball. Chris inquires about Ken's murderer, but Gale refuses to speak, so Chris takes Gale onto the bowling lane and begins rolling balls at him until Gale concedes. Gale mumbles that Ken saw something, but he drops out before finishing. Michelle is reviewing the case when she comes across a news report accusing Hatton of stealing evidence. Chris exits the bowling facility and drives Gale's car. Michelle goes to see her best friend Abby and asks her to access a damaged drive, adding that she cannot bring it to the police. Abby offers to assist, and Michelle leaves the drive with her. She returns to the bowling alley, only to find blood everywhere. She discovers the store manager injured on the floor following the previous assault. Chris goes to a store and buys some tools and gear to prepare for war. Michelle informs Archer of her fears that Chris is plotting retribution against Hatton, but Archer seems surprised. Hatton then pulls a battered Gale out of a truck, criticizing him for not obeying his commands as he had warned him not to make a move. Hatton demands to know what he told Chris, but Gale claims he didn't say anything. Hatton then orders the men to lay low because he intends to take care of Michelle. Michelle meets Archer at a restaurant, wary of her calm manner, and Hatton reveals himself. He provides Michelle with a file that includes his officers' medical records, which would absolve them of any wrongdoing. She sees no reports of Chris, but Hatton informs her that Chris was the one who shot Ken, and his police officers were simply responding to shots fired. Michelle refuses to accept this, accusing Hatton of committing the crime. Archer calms them down and tells them that the purpose is to find and bring in Chris alive. Michelle shares with Archer her observations from her visit to the bowling facility, including the recording of security footage. Michelle and Archer inquire about the whereabouts of Hatton's squad, but he informs them that they are off duty. Spencer was at home that night when he heard a noise and went to investigate with his gun. He assumes it's just the sprinkler, but Chris ambushes and knocks him down, disarming him. Chris then grabs him at gunpoint and has him tape his mouth shut. Chris then begins to wield his homemade weapon, urging Spencer to pick up his gun. However, each time Spencer attempts to do so, Chris viciously knocks him down with the tape, muffles his screams, and continues. Chris takes his tape, and Spencer apologizes for Ken but claims Hatton and Perry committed the act, which he did not witness. Chris, not believing him, demands the mobile phone code before leaving him there and instructs him to keep his mouth shut. Hatton leaves the meeting and receives a phone call from Chris, who tells him about Spencer and asks if he or Perry pulled the trigger. Hatton issues a threat to Chris, stating that Ken posed a threat, that he now poses one, and that Hatton will find him. Later, while waiting for someone, Perry notices two black teenagers loitering nearby. He approaches them and starts harassing them, asking what's in their bag. The terrified boys comply, and Perry dumps their items on the ground. One of the boys scowls at Perry, who draws his gun on the teenager to scare him. Perry then hears a phone ring nearby, and the boys flee. As he answers the phone from the garbage can, Chris tackles him. Chris begins impaling Perry with nails, demanding to know whether he pressed the trigger. Perry refuses to answer and dives for his gun, striking Chris in the leg as he flees. Perry pursues him into a building, firing shots before running out of ammo. Perry draws a knife and taunts Chris as he searches for him. Perry criticizes Ken, so Chris ambushes him, and the two start fighting. They mercilessly throw each other around until Chris has the upper hand, knocking him down. Chris then pulls up a huge metal container and smashes Perry's hand. Michelle then picks up Chris and becomes angry with him for hitting cops when she is attempting to keep him out of jail, but Chris reminds her that they attempted to kill him. Chris is unconcerned about incarceration as he seeks vengeance for his brother. Michelle invites Chris to lay low at Abby's house. While Chris goes to clean up, Abby starts freaking out about what she witnessed on the drive. Chris returns, and as the two sit to watch the footage, Abby receives a fatal shot to the head. A masked man wielding a machine gun storms in, but Michelle shoots him and he escapes. As they hear sirens in the distance, Chris checks on Michelle, who has sustained a gunshot wound to her leg. Michelle orders Chris to flee and deliver the laptop to Archer. Chris escapes with the laptop. He sits by the side of the road, listening to an audio recording of Hatton conversing with someone who sounds like Archer. The two grumble about Ken looking around, and she plans to move him to another unit. We then hear Hatton spot someone and open fire. Chris then contacts Archer, informing her that he has located the evidence, but it is encrypted. She provides him an address where they can meet and take care of things. Following the conversation, Archer turns to Hatton, informing him that Chris is on his way, and she believes he knows everything. We then see Chris in his gym, where he blackens a pretend gun before lighting incense for his father and brother. At the address, Archer, Hatton, and his team are readying heavy armor and a multitude of soldiers to capture Chris, while we observe Michelle in captivity. Outside, a van approaches the gate, reflecting the opening scene, except Chris is wearing body armor. After killing the men, he goes in pursuit of Michelle and runs into Archer, who is holding her at gunpoint. When Michelle reveals that she is holding a knife, she orders Chris to submit. Hatton then rushes up behind Chris and knocks him down. Archer urges him to finish off Chris before leaving with Michelle. Hatton draws his gun to attack, but Chris quickly attacks him, and the two fight over the gun. Hatton gains the upper hand on a weakened Chris and throws him hard. Hatton feels strong and orders Chris to get up. But this time, Chris uses all of his talents to hit and throw Hatton. Hatton then draws a knife and slashes at Chris, who escapes. Meanwhile, Michelle frees herself and disarms Archer. Hatton seeks out Chris, who wraps a chain around his hand and informs Hatton of his location. The two square off, striking and avoiding each other. Chris soon has the upper hand, delivering some vicious blows to Hatton before slamming him over the balcony. Hatton is not dead, and as Chris pulls up a knife to kill him, Michelle orders them both to stand down. Hatton promises that there will always be guys like him and that they will continue. Michelle shoots Hatton dead when he tries to raise his gun. As they depart, Michelle tells Chris that Ken would be proud of him. Chris surrenders to the cops, satisfied after his retribution. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.